It was a quiet, ordinary morning in La Plata, Maryland. A small town where neighbors know each other by name, where laughter drifts through tree-lined streets, and where families gather in the warmth of community parks. It was the kind of place where tragedy felt distant, almost impassable. But on this morning, something was terribly wrong. At Will's Memorial Park, tucked between swings and slides, a woman stood alone. Her clothes were wrinkled, her movements mechanical, and her eyes empty. She was pushing a swing, back and forth, over and over. In the swing sat a little boy. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. That boy was Ji'Aire Lee, just 3 years old, full of laughter, love, and life, until he wasn't. This is the story of a mother who killed her own son, of a boy left to die in a swing, alone and helpless, as his mother stood just inches away. It happened in broad daylight, in public, while the world walked by and did nothing. This isn't just another true crime story. It's a devastating reminder of what happens when no one steps in. This is the story of Ji'Aire Lee. Ji'Aire Darnell Lee was the kind of child who lit up every room he entered. Bright-eyed, energetic, and full of joy, he was the heart of his small family. With chubby cheeks and an infectious laugh, Ji'Aire had a presence far larger than his 3 years of life. He loved music, cartoons, toy cars, and superhero capes. But more than anything, Ji'Aire loved people. He hugged freely, smiled constantly. He was the kind of child you didn't forget. To his mother, Romechia Simms, he was everything. Photos show the two of them at birthday parties, family barbecues, and quiet days in the park. Ji'Aire always smiling. Romechia always holding him close. Friends remembered how she gushed about him constantly. His first steps, his favorite songs, the funny things he said. She seemed endlessly proud. Family members recall a little boy who loved to dance and sing, who ran full speed into your arms and never missed a chance to laugh. To them, Ji'Aire wasn't just a child. He was healing. He was light. He was the future. But then, the unthinkable happened. The same mother who adored him, who posted about him, cared for him, cherished him, ended his life in the most unfathomable way. How could someone so loving do something so horrific? Was it stress? Was it a moment of overwhelming desperation? Or was there something even darker behind the swing at Will's Memorial Park? These are the questions that haunted. It was May 20th, 2015, a warm spring morning in La Plata, Maryland. Romechia Simms, 24 years old, packed up her toddler son Ji'Aire and walked to Will's Memorial Park. On the surface, it seemed like any ordinary day. Romechia had taken Ji'Aire to that park before. She knew the layout, the swings, the benches shaded under tall trees. That morning, she quietly placed him into one of the bucket swings. He settled in. She began to push. Back and forth. Back and forth. Witnesses later described it as a peaceful scene, a mother doting on her child. At first glance, nothing was wrong. But the hours began to pass. Morning faded into afternoon. The sun crept across the sky, and still Romechia was there, pushing Ji'Aire. By evening, other families had come and gone. The lights in the park dimmed. It grew cold. Romechia hadn't moved. She continued pushing. Ji'Aire never got out of the swing. Some passers-by began to take notice. A few people approached. One brought her a bottle of water. Another offered food. Some said Romechia appeared tired, anxious, even confused, but she insisted she was fine. By midnight, she was still there. Then dawn came, and the pattern repeated. She had now been at the park for over 24 hours. Neighbors later described her behavior as odd or troubled. She paced around the swing. She mumbled to herself. Some said she seemed to be in a trance, detached from reality. But no one called emergency services. No one made the decision that could have changed everything. Maybe it was fear of overreacting. Maybe it was the stigma of interfering with a stranger. Some even assumed Ji'Aire was just sleeping. But by that time, Ji'Aire had already died, likely within the first 24 hours of their arrival. Romechia stood there and continued pushing. As if nothing was wrong for almost 2 full days, the scene remained unchanged. A mother methodically pushing her lifeless child in a swing. This was not a private tragedy. It was a public horror unfolding in real time. And yet, it happened without alarm, without intervention, without a single voice strong enough to stop it. By the time authorities arrived, it was too late. A child's life had slipped away in front of everyone, slowly, silently, and in plain sight. From the morning of May 20th, 2015, until the early hours of May 22nd, Romechia Simms remained in Wills Memorial Park, never leaving the swing set where her 3-year-old son, Ji'Aire Lee, sat. For nearly 40 continuous hours, she stayed. No food, no water, no sleep, and no understanding that her son had died. She kept pushing him, back and forth, in a slow, repetitive rhythm that barely changed. Onlookers later described the scene as surreal, peaceful even at a glance, a mother lovingly rocking her child. But something about it felt wrong, very wrong. Romechia was unable to recognize her son's death. She wandered barefoot around the swing set, talking to herself, sometimes pausing to whisper unintelligible words. One person recalled her mumbling about spirits and unseen threats. Some say she spoke calmly to Ji'Aire, as if he were still alive and listening. To Romechia, he probably was. But Ji'Aire had died within the first 24 hours, possibly even sooner. An autopsy would later confirm the heartbreaking cause of death: hypothermia and dehydration. Temperatures had dipped dangerously low overnight. Ji'Aire, dressed only in a sweatshirt, pants and socks, had no protection from the cold. There was no food, no water. His small, vulnerable body could not survive. Yet no one stepped in. Witnesses came and went. Some offered food. A few asked if Romechia needed help. But no one called authorities. Many later admitted they weren't sure what they were seeing. Some were afraid to make a scene. Others assumed the boy was asleep. One person said she looked like she just needed rest. That assumption cost Ji'Aire his life. Finally, early on May 22nd, a park maintenance worker arrived to begin his shift. As he drew closer, the unnatural stillness, the pale color of Ji'Aire's skin, the way his body sat in the swing, triggered a gut reaction. He called 911. When police arrived, they approached Romechia cautiously. She was still pushing the swing, still speaking softly. When officers stopped her, she looked confused, disoriented, almost surprised to see them. She did not resist. She did not understand. Her son had been dead for more than a day, and she had never known. The call came in at 6:55 a.m. on May 22, 2015. First responders arrived at Wills Memorial Park, expecting to find a woman in distress. What they found instead would haunt them and an entire town for years. Romechia Simms stood beside a swing, gently pushing the limp body of her 3-year-old son. She didn't scream when officers approached. She didn't run. She seemed calm, unaware. When they asked her to stop, she looked confused. Ji'Aire Lee was already gone. His skin was pale. His lips were blue. His body cold to the touch. The initial report stunned even seasoned officers. They had never seen anything like it. Romechia was immediately taken into custody. She was described as dazed, quiet, and emotionally flat. She didn't fight their officers. She didn't appear to understand why they were there. It would later be revealed that she had spent nearly 40 hours in that park, pushing her son's body in a state of deep psychosis, completely detached from the reality around her. News of Ji'Aire's death broke within hours. The headline was as shocking as it was heartbreaking. Boy found dead in swing after being pushed for 2 days. Photos of Ji'Aire spread across television and social media. His bright eyes, gap-toothed smile, and joyful energy capturing hearts across the country. The horror of his death clashed painfully with the innocence in his pictures. Public reaction was swift and visceral. People demanded answers. Why had no one stepped in? Why had bystanders failed to call the police? And most of all, how had Romechia been allowed to care for a child when she was clearly suffering? Soon after her arrest, Romechia was charged with first-degree child abuse, child neglect, and involuntary manslaughter. The charges were severe and controversial. At first glance, the public saw a mother responsible for her child's death. But as more details emerged, a different story came to light. One of a young woman with documented mental illness who had been repeatedly failed by the systems meant to protect both her and her son. Romechia's family, especially her mother, revealed that they had pleaded for help in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Emergency room visits, psychiatric evaluations, yet nothing stuck. She was released. No mandatory treatment. No follow-up. No state involvement. In the end, Ji'Aire died not just from exposure, but from a society that didn't act in time. The aftermath of his death wasn't just about grief. It became about blame. And about the question no one could answer: how many people saw this coming and still did nothing? In court, psychiatric experts testified that Romechia had been suffering from an intense psychotic episode during the 40 hours she spent in the park. She had lost all touch with reality. She did not understand. Ji'Aire was dead. She did not realize the danger he was in. She was not trying to harm her child. She was trying, in her mind, to protect him. In February 2016, Romechia entered an all-forward plea to involuntary manslaughter. That meant she didn't admit guilt, but accepted that the evidence against her was strong enough for a conviction. It was a legal compromise that allowed the court to proceed without a lengthy trial. Following psychological evaluations, the judge determined that Romechia was not criminally responsible for Ji'Aire's death, Maryland's legal standard for an insanity defense. Rather than prison, she was placed on conditional release, a strict court-supervised program requiring her to take psychiatric medications, attend regular mental health evaluations, and be monitored indefinitely. A single violation could send her to a mental institution. The ruling divided the community. Many felt it was an injustice, that Ji'Aire's death deserved prison time. Others saw it differently. This was not evil, but untreated illness. A mother who loved her child, lost inside her own mind, and let down at every stage by the systems meant to help. The courtroom was not just weighing guilt. It was weighing the unbearable cost of failure to act, failure to protect, and failure to see the signs before it was too late. The trial didn't end with justice. It ended with reckoning, and a haunting reminder that, in America, severe mental illness often goes unnoticed until it's too late. The small town of La Plata, Maryland, was left shattered. For many residents, the tragedy of Ji'Aire Lee's death didn't just challenge their sense of safety. It forced them to confront how something so devastating could unfold in plain sight. Locals were consumed with questions that had no easy answers. How could this happen here? How did no one stop it? Who should have done more? Candlelight vigils were held in Ji'Aire's honor. Families gathered at Will's Memorial Park, laying down teddy bears, flowers, and cards near the swing where he had died. Strangers cried together. Parents held their children a little tighter. And in the stillness of those moments, the town grieved not only a life lost, but an innocence stolen from the entire community. Yet beneath the mourning, frustration simmered. Some residents directed their anger at Romechia Simms, unable to reconcile her mental illness with the loss of a child. Others blamed the bystanders, neighbors, joggers, other parents, who had passed through the park and failed to call for help. But perhaps the loudest anger was reserved for the system itself. The hospitals that released her, the agencies that didn't follow up, the social safety nets that never caught her. Charles County State's Attorney Tony Covington was especially vocal. After the verdict, he held a press conference stating, "This child should be alive today. There were warning signs, there were red flags, and no one acted. The system failed Ji'Aire." Mental health advocates, meanwhile, saw Ji'Aire's death as a turning point. Organizations began calling for reforms. Mandatory follow-up care after psychiatric evaluations, better postpartum mental health screening, and more accessible support for single mothers living with mental illness. What happened in La Plata, they argued, was not unique. It was just visible. Many mothers suffer in silence. Many never get help. Romechia's family also spoke out. Her mother, through tears, told the press Romechia loved Ji'Aire with all her heart. She didn't want this. She begged for help. I begged for help. Nobody listened. She pushed for public education about schizophrenia and postpartum psychosis, emphasizing that these aren't signs of weakness or poor character, but serious medical conditions that require treatment and understanding. The public response wasn't just emotional. It was transformative. In schools, counselors began incorporating discussions on mental health into their curriculum. Town halls hosted forums on how to recognize signs of psychiatric distress. Faith leaders preached compassion, awareness, and vigilance. The tragedy had ripped the community apart, but it had also ignited a powerful desire for change. Ji'Aire's name became a symbol, not just of loss, but of what happens when silence, stigma, and systemic gaps go unchallenged. The community could never bring Ji'Aire back, but it could choose to never let it happen again. Ji'Aire Lee was only 3 years old when he died. He never got to start preschool. He never got to learn to ride a bike. He never got to dress up for Halloween again or open presents on Christmas morning. His life ended not because of violence, but because of silence, because help never came in time. Yet even in death, Ji'Aire's story became something more than tragedy, action. To remember that minding your business can sometimes cost a life. Because in the end, this wasn't just about one mother and one child. It was about all of us. How we listen, how we intervene, how we support, and how we care for the people falling through the cracks right in front of us. If someone had followed up, if the hospital had kept her one more night, if a neighbor had made that call just 12 hours earlier, Ji'Aire might still be alive. We can't change what happened, but we can decide what happens next. We can fund mental health care. We can reduce stigma. We can demand better from our institutions. We can speak up when something feels wrong. Ji'Aire Lee's life was short, but it left behind a legacy, a painful, powerful reminder of what's at stake when we stay silent. Let us honor him by making sure no other child dies in plain sight. Let us turn this tragedy into lasting change. Let us never look away again.